Welcome to Allies or Enemies. I'm Jess.
And I am Shawn, and this is it. We have come to the end of our top 100 favorite board games countdown, and this is going to be the top 10.
Thank you so much to everyone for watching and commenting. We really appreciate it.
And we did actually look before, for the rest of them, we haven't looked at each other's list before we started, but for this one we did because we thought there'd be a lot of crossover. And there is quite a bit of crossover.
And that makes sense because we primarily play with each other. And so our top 10 favorite games are going to be more likely to be ones that we both really enjoy.
So there are going to be a lot of double ups, but there's also a few that one of us likes a lot more than the other one. So let's get rolling. And I am first this time. So Jess gets the ultimate number one of number ones. But let's kick it off. My number 10 is Caverna, and Caverna is my top Uwe Rosenberg game. We've had a few of his games on this list, and what I like about Caverna compared to the others is it's just a little bit sillier. It's more fun, it's more fun to play, which is why it's my top one of his, but it's just more fun in that you're dwarves and you're cave dwelling and there's adventuring. And there's just bits of it that are a little bit silly. And I like the table presence of it as well. It's fun to see all of those possibilities out there, to see all of the rooms and all of the chunks of cave and all of the different animals.
I was going to say all of the animal meeples. Yeah, that's my favorite part.
Yeah, to see all the different things just kind of waiting for you to play with. It makes for a really fun sandbox.
Yeah, we recently got the expansion for it, and that's been fantastic because it's added a lot of asymmetry to it, which is a really interesting mechanism. And all these different fantasy races, and they all play a little bit differently. And one of them you feed with stones, for example.
Right, yeah. Yeah, that's one of my favorite ones. It makes me think of the Rockbiter from Neverending Story. He was my favorite Neverending Story character. I love that movie. And I really love Caverna. So that is my number 10.
My number 10 is Lost Ruins of Arnak. You are archaeologists exploring a new land. So you go to sites to get these items. It could be tablets or arrowheads or gems. And then you might spend some compasses to explore a new part, come across a guardian, and then use your items to defeat the guardians. But your primary goal is to do a lot of research. So there's this research track that you have to try and get to the top of, spending items along the way. So it's really great and interesting about how the combinations all come together and how to make it all work. But one of the things I love about it is just the look of it all. The arrowheads look fantastic, the stone tablets look really good, the gems to it, and all the little card details on it as well that you're adding to your deck as you go. There's just so much detail and thought put into kind of all of the elements of it.
Yeah, I love it. I've said before that this was the game I was most excited about in 2020, and it really did pay off. And one of the reasons I was so excited is because it looked like it was going to be like Indiana Jones, the board game. And I love Indiana Jones, and it is. The theme is just so entrenched in it as well, and with the Guardians, and there's kind of some fun lore to those as well. I want to know more about them, and I'm really excited about the expansion too. I think some people already have their hands on it, and I'm really excited to get that.
Yeah, I can't wait because it adds one of our favorite elements, which is asymmetrical player powers. So really looking forward to playing that, and that's my number 10.
Our shared number 9 is Horrified. And I love Horrified. I love Universal movies. I love old horror movies. I love horror movies in general. But I'm such a sucker for the old Universal Studios horror movies.
And I hadn't seen those actually until we got the board game. And then because of that, we went back and watched them all. It's super fun to play it out and how all of the villagers that you're trying to save are from the movies. And so there is that little bit of a personal element of really liking this character, so wanting to save them.
Yeah, it's great. It's great that the locations are from the show or from the different films, that all of the characters are from the films, that they do a really good job of differentiating the different monsters in it too. All the artwork, even the when you open up the box first, there's a little warning, things are going to get scary on the back of the rule book. Just all of it is so well thought out.
And it's cooperative, and so it's super nice to have a relatively light cooperative game that we can bring out and then play pretty quickly. That's a bit of a challenge. By the time you introduce 3, if not 4 monsters, it can get really hard.
Yeah, 4 is tough, and this is one too that when we picked it up, it was like $20 somewhere, and it was kind of like like a Universal movie monsters. I love Universal movies, so I'll get it, but I had very low expectations. And it just blew them out of the water.
Yeah, we have a lot of fun playing it. And that's our number 9.
But my number 8 is Gloomhaven. What drew me to it is we were just on a trip in Bristol, and we went to a board game store, and I asked the guy, what's the literal heaviest game that you have? What's the largest box of game that you have in this store? And he said, you got to check out Gloomhaven. So we picked it up. And we just fell in love with it. And it's great because I've always been interested in dungeon crawlers, but I don't love dice rolling. So the idea that there is a dungeon crawler that's really a card management game was really interesting to me. But then the legacy components of it and just the drive to open up those boxes and see those characters was all-consuming.
Yeah, and sometimes we would be up way longer than we meant to be because we'd think, I think just one more or maybe 2 more until we can retire our character. And we were so interested in retiring and opening up a new one that we would just power through and keep playing. And one of the great things about it as well is it's cooperative. And in so many dungeon crawlers, one person has to kind of be the overlord and the other person is the characters. And it was great that for this, you manage the enemies, but then you're both fighting against them.
Yeah, that was a huge draw as well. The fact that the enemies work kind of like on an AI system, and that it works so well, was a real selling point too. But it's opening those boxes, and getting those characters. It was so exciting, and it was so fun to do that part of it. So that is my number 8.
My number 8 is Wingspan. I love the look of Wingspan. I really like the theme. I love that you have to, in order to get the birds, you have to kind of feed the right kind of food in order to kind of bring them over. And the mechanics for this work really well. And then what really pushed it up my list was the Oceania expansion. And part of that was having those amazing kiwi birds that we love, but also just fixing a few of the elements. So it made the egg strategy a little bit less powerful. It introduced nectar, so the food that you had to get gave you a little bit more flexibility. And so all of that combined made this a game that every time we take it out, I'm really excited to play it.
Yeah, I like this game. I think the base game, I was just like, it's close, but it's not quite there, which is a big reason why I was a little lower on my list. But the Oceania expansion really does solve a lot of those problems, and I think just makes it a way better game.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm always a sucker for things that look really good. And the player boards and the birdhouse all of that looks fantastic. Mm-hmm. And that's my number 8.
7.
My number 7 is Great Western Trail, and Great Western Trail had me right from the theme. I'm a fan of cowboys and westerns, and so I was already on board, but then the game itself it really is terrific. It's a rondel, kind of a Euro rondel game where you're managing a hand of cards, and those cards are cows. And so you got to take your cows to Kansas City and put them on some trains as far as you can send them. And just within that, there's so many fun little decisions because you're choosing your workers, you're putting your buildings, you're moving the train, you're deciding when to spend cows and when to keep cows. And there's just a lot I like to it.
All the mechanics for this just work really well. And again, that decision making, because as you move your train along, whether to pull into the stop, but you have to give up a person. Mm-hmm. And so whether you want to have less workers, again, makes it some trade-offs that you have to consider.
And the expansion, again, I think really adds a lot to this one as well, because you can send your cows to different places, including Canada, which is nice. And you get to put little buildings out, and there's extra ways to trade your cow cards to make that a little bit easier as well. And then it adds that little bit that I think it needed.
Yeah.
That makes it like, it's interesting because it adds more, but it feels smoother at the same time, which is the perfect way that you do an expansion. But that is my number 7.
My number 7 is Dwellings of Eldervale. And I was sold on the look of this. It seemed like it would be a really interesting fantasy theme, which I really enjoy. It combines so many different elements. The workers that you put out, so it's worker placement to put them on the tile, and you might collect resources or perform actions. And some of those actions might be tile laying, so you'll pick a tile and where to put it. Other times you're going to be purchasing cards to build out your tableau. And all of it combines to not only look amazing and to have the super fun element of turning your people into dwellings by adding the actual roofs to it. But all the decision making and how it all goes together for having so much work pretty smoothly into a really nice package.
Yeah, it is interesting that you've got like 2 different kinds of cards, and then you've also got, when you bring your workers back, you're putting them on cards to activate certain ones of the cards, and then you're also trying to like level up your workers, kind of, sort of. You're trying to gain your other ones, your warrior and your wizard and your dragon. And it really does sound like when you just explain all the bits, it's like there's a lot going on, and then you play it and you're like, oh, this all makes sense, and it does look great.
Yeah, I always get kind of excited to play it as soon as we start laying it out, and that's my number 7.
6.
Both of our number 6 is the same game, or actually the same 3 games. It is the Pandemic Legacy series, and we're grouping together 1, 2, and 0 all under one umbrella. And probably like a lot of folks, we saw the idea of a legacy game and we thought, we're going to buy a game and then just play it and throw it away. Like, I don't know about that. Like the idea of that just, it felt, there was something that didn't feel right about it. But then we actually got it for a present.
Yeah, one of my brothers got it for me for Christmas, and it was great. And from then on, we were sold on Legacy because we realized that every time we brought it out to play, it felt like an experience. It was special because it might be the one time you play through that month. And I really like the pandemic system. It's cooperative. It always is a bit of a challenge. And the Legacy does such a great job of introducing new bits with every month, and that you do feel like you're not playing the same game again and again. You're playing slightly different versions.
Yeah, and I think we realized too, like after we'd played it, and you play through whatever it is, 12 to 14 or 15 games of it, and we just realized how many of our games do we really play 12 games? Like, you're actually getting a decent amount of play out of that. And we really felt like we did. So when season 2 came out, we hopped on it, and we didn't like it quite as much. But then season 0 came out, and season 0, I think, was a real winner. It's like, it's got a Cold War theme, and it looks the best of the 3 as well.
Yeah, right now I'm leaning towards season 0 being my favorite of the bunch, but it's hard to tell whether that's because it's the most different from the other 2 and from kind of the base Pandemic itself, or because it's the most recent one we played. But I thought it was fantastic, so highly recommend season 0.
But yeah, we were really into all 3.
Yeah, absolutely. And so those were that was combined our number 6.
5.
My number 5 is Everdell. And Everdell is a game, I talked a little bit earlier about how Gloomhaven is a game that really got us back into board gaming. And on that same trip to Bristol, we picked up Everdell. And I'd played a lot of games before, but this was really the kind of launching back in. And Everdell, we saw in a board game cafe, and this is the ultimate, like, you walk by it and you want to know what it is. Just everything about it is so welcoming. And then the game is great. Like, I love the tableau building, and I know people don't love the randomness, but but that's fine. It's not going to be perfect. It's a village built by animals. It can only be so good. They don't have opposable thumbs.
Yeah, and I was pretty new to board gaming. For years, I'd only played more of the gateway games and instead of going more into it. And it was me who picked out Everdale for the board game cafe. We went in earlier, it was booked up, made a reservation for later. Spent the next 2 hours in a different cafe, learning the rules. And it was all me, even though you were the bigger board gamer at the time. This was one that I was so excited about to get out and play. And I loved it from that very first moment.
And I think it might be coming up on your list a little bit later too. But for me, that is my number 5.
My number 5 is Barren Park. Barren Park is designed by Phil Walker Harding, who's such a master of making games accessible. And I think this is just a prime example. It's a tile placement game where you are building out a bear park. So you've got your different types of bear, your koala bear, your polar bear, your brown bear, and your sun bear. They all live in different habitats. And as you put out a tile, depending on what icons you cover, dictates what tiles you get to take, including the big ones that build out your park. So how you place it makes a big difference, and the race to cover the tiles to get your bear statue that you use to put in. And each game plays a little bit differently because 3 new goal tiles come out each time that you're working towards.
Yeah, it's this is a favorite of mine, and this is one that I can just play back to back to back because it plays so quickly, and it is that simple play a tile, get a tile. And it's such a simple system, but just putting together the park, I don't want to say too much because this is going to come up a little bit later for me as well, but I really like it.
And I do love games that you have something to show for it at the end, and you do have this phenomenal bear park at the end. And that's my number 5.
My number 4 is Dune Imperium. And this was my favorite game of 2020. And Dune Imperium it's a terrific game if you're a Dune fan because it really does a great job of capturing that theme. The characters are just slightly asymmetrical, but it's got the politics and it's got, that slow, grindy war of attrition, and it's got the dunes and the spice and everything you would want in a Dune game. But mechanically, it's just really sound. It's so tight to get to those 10 points where every point counts. But it's nice because there are different paths. You do have to kind of figure out how to do a little bit everywhere while still using the worker placement and the card drafting and every other part of it. And I'm just fascinated by this game. I really like Dune.
Yeah, and last time, actually, you did try buying the spice must flow, and it worked in your favor. So you really can go in lots of different directions. And we recently saw the movie, which was fantastic. And because the game's based on the movie, because it uses kind of the artwork of the actors who play the different characters, I think now that I've seen the movie, it brings the game up a little bit too. It just makes me more excited to play it again.
Yeah, and the second movie, whoever the production company is of this, because the first movie's great and the board game's great, and that's why it's my number 4.
My number 4 is Terraforming Mars. I love the theme of this. You transform the planet by selecting your cards each generation of which ones you're going to use. And a lot of them might warm the planet's surface or put out ocean tiles. And slowly, generation by generation, you're transforming this red, barren planet to be a livable space. So I love the science behind it all. It actually is in reference to the Red Mars book series. If you haven't read it and you love the game, I highly recommend it because you can definitely see references even in the rules. The people they use is the author of the books, and the technology to use to transform the planet is also incorporated in the cards.
And I really like we've been playing with a few of the expansions just lately, and Preludes is definitely, everyone says Preludes is the one to get, and Preludes is the one to get because Preludes really helps kind of start you at turn 4. It kind of kicks you into the full game right from the start, which is not quite necessary, but almost necessary. And then the boards are really good too. It gives you 2 different parts of Mars.
And it makes such a difference for having the different milestones and awards that you're going for. Because if you play this game a lot, being able to totally change your strategy based on that is really helpful for the replayability of the game.
Yeah. So I would highly recommend both of those expansions.
And one day, those fancy 3D tiles are really gonna... I'm so tempted by them. We have held off thus far. One day I'm gonna cave and get those as well. And that's my number 4.
My number 3 is Baron Park. But Baron Park is my favorite light game. It just does it perfectly for me. It does everything I want in a light game, and its tile placement, one of my favorite mechanics. And it builds so nicely that you start with that one little section of your bear park. And I love that there's a bear park and that they put it out just like, oh yeah, it's like one of those bear parks. And it's like, it's put to you so like confidently that I actually looked up like, is there a bear park like in Germany? There's no bear park, but please build a bear park. I will go to it for sure. But just that you build that little bit and then you add kind of that next section that you're going to get in the next section. And all of that is variable. Like every section of your bear park, like every possible section is different than every other section.
Yeah, it is amazing because often both of us will have very different layouts for our park. Some will have like a 2x2 or even just a straight row of 4. And one element for this one that worked really well was the Bad News Bears expansion, which is a fantastic name for an expansion. But you are adding grizzly bears and just being able to add these really big tiles that have these really odd shapes. But if it works, it can get you a lot of points and fill in a lot of space really quickly.
And it also has monorails, which just gives me an excuse to sing the Simpsons song every time we use them. But that is my number 3. And if you want a light game, get it. That's Baron Park, my number 3.
My number 3 is Gloomhaven. I love dungeon crawlers, I love cooperative games, and I love legacy games. And this is all 3 of those. So it was naturally a really good fit for me. And it's incredibly asymmetric. So each of the characters plays so differently. And it always takes a few missions to kind of figure out the style of each of them. And the missions, too, always have a bit of an interesting puzzle because some of them are really fighty. Some of them is having to figure out how you're going to go in and take something out quickly. So there's always a little bit of different strategy that you're going to use for each of them. And it took over our lives for a few months. So to be able to have a game that could keep us entertained for hundreds of hours was fantastic.
It was such a cool experience. It really was. And we were talking about like, can we get cups printed with like can we get t-shirts with the different characters that we used? And we just really got into it where we were like, should we design levels for this? Should we? And we've never done that with any other game. And I don't think we've actually done that with any game since either. So it's kind of one that like it had its part in our life and we were so entrenched in that.
It's something we've been looking for ever since, almost with every new campaign game we get. So I'm really looking forward to Frosthaven and seeing what that one is. And that's my number 3.
My number 2 is Gaia Project. And Gaia Project is probably my favorite example of asymmetry in any game, and I love asymmetry. It's got 14 different factions with 2 factions linked to 7 different colors, which is really more than they needed to put in, but I appreciate it. And each one of those factions has just kind of a slight difference, like one little power, but those powers make a huge difference in what you're doing. And it's because the game is so kind of tightly wound, like all of the pieces work so well together. And there's a lot of different pieces here where there's a tech board, there's a board where you're moving to different planets, there's your own personal board where you're building your engine of getting your buildings out. Then there's another board that's for the scoring, including both round goals and game end goals.
But those round goals switch up. There's tons of them that come out in the order that they come out in, and then the end of game goals as well. And sometimes that can be a bit tricky too. And some of those tech tiles, I feel like there's some of them I still have yet to try going up that I'm sure work really well with certain factions.
It really feels like it's kind of a sandbox, but a sandbox that has its barriers in just the right place to kind of keep you within that and really create this interesting puzzle. And if you like asymmetry, you really can't beat it. So that is my number 2.
My number 2 is Anachrony, and Anachrony is another one that uses asymmetrical player powers really well. You can choose one of 4 factions to be, and this takes place in a post-apocalyptic world. So the world's basically destroyed. So to send your workers out to the main board, they've got to be wearing mech suits. And we upgraded and got the really nice looking ones, which is a key part of why I like this game, is those mech suits are fantastic. And your workers go out and they collect resources and they build buildings. And then some of those buildings go in your personal city that you can visit without having the mech suits. So I love the asymmetry of it, because the player boards are all different and the city boards are all different as well. And you can really feel the theme of it too, because you can get all your workers, if they perform their actions, come back tired, but you can force them awake. They just won't be very happy about it. And so all of that ties it all together really nicely.
Yeah, it's dystopian and it's post-apocalyptic, but also pre-apocalyptic. So it's kind of like every negative thing you could have all at once, and they're like running out of water, and it's kind of every bad thing. But I will talk about it a little bit more in 1 second.
So that was my number 2.
1.
My number 1 is Anachrony, and a big part of that, like you were just saying, is the theme. But even with the theme, there's a lot of games with great themes, but this is just a great game. The mechanics work really well in how everything works together, and it is a fairly heavy game. And there is a lot to think about, where you're buying the buildings, you're putting them in your city, you're putting your guys in the mechs, you're setting up for your turn and thinking, how many mechs do I want? You're putting them out. There's also time travel, which we haven't even mentioned yet, which is really just a clever way of kind of like a bank mechanic, where you're getting resources that you're going to need for the future, but you have to pay them back by going back in time and putting them back to where they belong in the timeline. And the great thing is, really everything in this game has those little extra bits that you got to think about. Like everything has kind of another layer on the layer, but none of it is that complicated. I think this is rated, probably even heavier in a lot of people's minds than it actually is, because it's a little bit of a learning curve to kind of get your head around it. But as soon as you know the system and the iconography and everything else, it just makes sense. And then you can add all those modules, and that's another part. There are so many different modules that you can add to this that really change it up and just add another level.
Even the base game, they've laid out that learning curve a little bit by having the different sides of the board and the different sides of the time track. So you can ramp up your difficulty bit by bit as you play more, just even within the base game itself.
And I think Mind Clash, they generally do that so well with their game.
Yeah.
And I just love it. Obviously it's my number 1, so there's no game I would rather play than Anachrony, and that is my number 1.
My number 1 is Everdell. I love the look of it. I love all of those components with the wood and the squishy berries and that big tree, and the gameplay is wonderful. I love building my village tableau and seeing what characters I have and how I can make it all work. And the flow of the game is really nice as well, because you start off with just a couple of workers, and then each season you get a few more. So sometimes in that first season you barely get to do anything, but bit by bit each season lasts just a little bit longer, until usually at the end of each game we have our full 15 cards of our village. So the gameplay and the mechanics of that ease you in nice and gently, which really suits this theme. And the expansions for this are great. Like the Belfair just takes the base game and just makes it a little bit better. It adds a couple of spaces which are really handy to have, and then some of those goal cards are much better because it doesn't need very specific characters. It's more just types of buildings that you might have.
Just the base game as well. Like you were saying, the fact that I never feel like I'm going to finish my city, and I always finish my city. And I like that in games where it's like, how am I going to do this? And then, oh, I did it again.
Yeah, and with Spirecrest, the nice thing about that one is because it ups the complexity, once you get to the stage where you're finishing it quite easily and having a lot of extra resources, the expedition of the Spirecrest gives you an opportunity to spend those and get a few extra points. And so we went all in on that big box that comes with the 2 new expansions and the wooden tree. And I can't wait because this is one that no matter what, I am always up for playing. And that's why it's my number 1.
And that is it. That brings us all the way to the end of our top 100. We made it to number 1. Thank you so much for watching, whether you're just here for this top 10 or if you've been here since the beginning, since 100, you are amazing. Thank you so much.
And if there are any great games that we missed, please do pop those in the comments. We would love to hear about them. Please like, subscribe, all of that really helps us out. And hopefully we will see you for the next one.